Well, as Stephen said, it is the fifth and final session of the day, and the topic will be the future vision for agriculture in Europe. The Commission, as you know, unveiled its vision for agriculture and food on February 19th, setting out a roadmap for the direction of travel for agricultural policy in the years to come. Those of you who are subscribed to AgriFacts, of course, got a sneak preview on February 12th. But now that the dust has settled on the vision, it's perhaps a good time to regroup and take a deeper dive into the good, bad and the ugly on some of the elements that were contained in that document. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we had very much hoped that Commissioner Christoph Hansen, responsible for agriculture and food, would be able to join us live by video link, but a schedule change during the plenary session in Strasbourg this week made that impossible. So to stimulate our discussion here this afternoon, we're going to listen to a clip that he recorded earlier, and this will be followed by a more in-depth discussion with my panellists, who will share their perspectives on the vision. But let's first hear from the man himself, Commissioner Christoph Hansen. I'll ask the technical team now to roll the video. Thank you.
Food and farming are vital for Europe's people, its economy and society. Every day, our agri-food sector provides healthy and high-quality foods for more than 450 million consumers. Farmers also play a central role in caring for nature and achieving our climate targets. We need the sector to flourish, to compete in a fair global marketplace, to be resilient against crises and shocks. We also need to guarantee our food sovereignty in the face of rising risks and vulnerabilities. Europe's future depends on it. But our farmers are pressured from many sides. Low income, bureaucracy, extreme climate events, geopolitical uncertainties. The vision for agriculture and food sets our course of action to face these challenges. It will make the sector more sustainable economically, environmentally and socially. We want farmers to be able to thrive and innovate. I want agriculture to stay an attractive sector to work in, so young people join the profession. Without young farmers, without youth in rural areas, our entire agri-food sector faces a risky future. Incomes should be fair and sufficient. Public support should be better targeted and sustainable practices better rewarded. There should be less red tape. Trade must be fair on both sides. We will work to ensure stronger alignment on production standards for imports. We must go back to the roots and reconnect food with territory, seasonality and traditions. This is not going to be an easy path. We need to work together, farmers, food supply chain, civil society, member states, European Parliament and consumers. Dialogue will be at the heart of my action. The diversity of our agri-food production is our strength. Different situations lead to different actions. Our approach will be tailored to respect and protect this diversity. Together, we can shape an attractive farming and food sector for generations to come. The vision will help us to achieve that goal.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner Hansen, ladies and gentlemen, the man who will be guiding that agricultural policy until 2029. Well, now, with the Polish presidency of the EU entering the final straight, we are now going to hear from the Director General of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, Mr. Bogusław Wiatek, who will provide an overview of the key priorities during Warsaw's tenure of the rotating presidency, which will run until June 30th. Mr. Wiatek was also our keynote speaker during the regional event we had back in November 2024. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's stay tuned to what this from the Director General of the Ministry has to say. Roll it there now, the team, the technical team.
Szanowni Państwo, z przyjemnością witam Państwa jako przedstawiciel kraju, który 1 stycznia objął przewodnictwo w Radzie Unii Europejskiej. Przejęliśmy prezydencję w szczególnym momencie historii. Trwa wojna w Ukrainie, rosną napięcia geopolityczne w różnych regionach świata. Bezpieczeństwo Europą to hasło przewodnie polskiej prezydencji. Obecnie bezpieczeństwo żywnościowe w Polsce i Unii Europejskiej nie jest zagrożone. Polska jako jeden z największych producentów rolnych w Unii wnosi istotny wkład w dostawy żywności w Europie, a także odgrywa kluczową rolę w zapewnieniu bezpieczeństwa żywnościowego na całym kontynencie. Wspólna polityka rolna Unii Europejskiej odgrywa kluczową rolę w zapewnieniu bezpieczeństwa żywnościowego. Dlatego musimy wspólnie zastanowić się, jak najlepiej wspierać rolników, chronić zasoby naturalne i zapewniać dostęp do żywności dla wszystkich konsumentów. Ogłoszona w lutym tego roku przez komisarza Christofa Hansena wizja dla rolnictwa i żywności wyznacza kierunki rozwoju europejskiego sektora rolno-spożywczego do 2040 roku, uwzględniając aktualne wyzwania i uwarunkowania. Podczas ostatniego posiedzenia Rady do Spraw Rolnictwa i Rybołówstwa przeprowadziliśmy debatę polityczną nad tym dokumentem. W pełni popieramy cele nakreślone w wizji rolnictwa i żywności, w szczególności nacisk na uczynienie sektora rolno-spożywczego bardziej konkurencyjnym, odpornym i atrakcyjnym dla przyszłych pokoleń rolników. Wizja trafnie diagnozuje wyzwania stojące przed rolnictwem, jednak wymaga to utrzymania odpowiedniego do wyzwań finansowania. Wspólna polityka rolna musi dysponować ambitnym i odrębnym budżetem, który oparty będzie nadal na 2 filarach. Dlatego wynegocjowanie satysfakcjonującego budżetu w ramach kolejnych wieloletnich ram finansowych jest sprawą zasadniczą dla rolnictwa i obszarów wiejskich. Równie istotne jest znaczne uproszczenie przepisów tak, aby WPR była bardziej efektywna i dostosowana do realnych potrzeb rolników. Rolnicy wiedzą, że przyszłość rolnictwa zależy od zdrowej gleby, dostępności wody, zróżnicowania biologicznego, wiedzą, jak realizować cele środowiskowe i klimatyczne. Dlatego trzeba złagodzić i uprościć wszelkie regulacje, aby rolnicy mogli się skupić na produkcji żywności. Wreszcie musimy wykorzystać szanse, jakie daje nam nauka, innowacyjność i dobre praktyki, a także inwestować w rozwiązania poprawiające odporność i konkurencyjność sektora rolnego. Wszystkie te elementy będą decydować o tym, czy młodzi ludzie będą chcieli przejmować gospodarstwa rolne i pozostawać na wsi. Szanowni Państwo, przewodnim mottem ministra Czesława Siekierskiego jest stały i otwarty dialog z rolnikami. Także od początku naszej prezydencji podkreślaliśmy to, że wszystkie planowane zmiany muszą wynikać z dialogu z rolnikami. Ważne jest, aby nic o rolnictwie nie działo się bez udziału rolników. Dzisiaj jesteśmy na porządku dyskusji o wizji komisarza o przyszłości rolnictwa. Przed nami pewnie jeszcze wiele sporów i uzgodnień, ale potrzeba nam dialogu z rolnikami i szukania wspólnych, najlepszych rozwiązań. Wobec zmieniającego się świata i warunków geopolitycznych dialog jest kluczem do sukcesu każdej wizji. Dialog z rolnikami jest także kluczem do bezpieczeństwa żywnościowego całej Europy. Wszystkim uczestnikom konferencji życzę owocnych obrad, inspirujących rozmów oraz konstruktywnych dyskusji, które będą fundamentem naszych przyszłych ustaleń i sukcesu europejskiego rolnictwa.
Thank you very much indeed. And that is Mr. Wiatyk, who is the Director General of the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development for Poland, obviously entering the final straight of his presidency. And I suppose a lot of those big files that he mentioned, the multi-annual financial framework and further discussion on the common agricultural policy, will continue during the Danish presidency that's forthcoming on July even the 1st. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get cracking with our last panel discussion of the day. So I would invite my distinguished speakers to join me on stage. That would be Petra, Alberto, Noor and Bart, please. Just by way of introduction, if I may, just to formally welcome you all, Petra Laux, who is Chief Sustainability Officer and Head of Sustainability and Corporate Affairs at Syngenta. Of course, Syngenta is a Forum founder. We have Alberto Arroyo Schnell, who is Head of Programme and Policy at the European Regional Office of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, which is a Forum partner as well. Noor Yafai, who is Europe Director for Global Policy and Institutional Partnerships at the Nature Conservancy International, another Forum partner. And right at the end there, we have Bart van der Vettera, who is Vice President for ESG Engagement for Nestlé Europe, also a Forum partner. So you're beginning to get a pattern developing there. So please give my speakers and panelists a very warm round of applause. Now, it is the graveyard shift. We're in the final straight of this very rich debate that we had since 9:15 this morning. So I would ask all of you now in your own time to deliver your 4-minute impulse statement. The clock is right in front of you. And just to tease out some of the details, some of your reactions to what Commissioner Hansen said, and also on the basis of the vision, the discussion on the vision, some of those elements, the good, bad and the ugly. Petra, take it away when you're ready.
Thanks, Rose. Good afternoon, everybody. A lot has been said at this point in time already, so let me emphasize a few things again, which are very relevant from a Syngenta perspective. First, this time the farmer is really at the center of the vision for the future of agriculture. That was certainly a miss in the past. This is something Syngenta is very proud of, because direct access to farmers, conversation with farmers has always been driving what we need to develop and do. So we are very pleased to see this. The second is that we have these 3 objectives. It's about food security, competitiveness, and sustainability. We need to achieve all 3, and if we are thinking it can be only one and one at the trade-off of another, that's not going to work. We need to find these sweet spots where we have all. So this is very much also in line with what we believe is the way forward in our organization. And then the third, of course, this came a bit in the panel as well, is this dialogue we need to have. This is why we are here. And personally, I'm pretty excited about the benchmarking on sustainability, which is in the vision, because still different people have different perspectives of what good looks like. And by a dialogue of what are the outcomes we actually want to achieve, we can probably be much more effective in moving forward. So this is what we love about the vision. Where we think there's a gap in Europe still is a gap in the toolbox for farmers. We expect a lot from our farmers. We have the 3 objectives, but our role then in the system is to help farmers achieve this. If you look at it, we are wanting a boost for the biologicals. We are excited to see in the vision now that there is the plan to accelerate market access of biocontrols going forward. In Europe, if you register a new active ingredient, it takes you between 6 and 8 years. This is ridiculous. Everything that is being used on farm in 2030 is already filed now, so we know what is coming. So very excited about this boost in biocontrols, as well as new genetic techniques, access to high-yielding seeds, which provide highly nutritious food, can become much better increased in Europe with new genetic techniques, resistance to pests, resistance to climate pressure. This is the other innovation area that is covered. And then, of course, the topic of the previous panel, right, the digitization. So digital has revolutionized many sectors. It's time now. So we harvest the rich data we are collecting as an R&D-based organization anyway, also on our soils, on the effect of farming techniques on soil health, water, binding capacity. So we are providing tools to farmers that help make the better decisions in their special situation. This is what we are excited about. You also said talk about the good,
bad, and the ugly.
The ugly. We are a bit sorry to see this race to the bottom on the reciprocity clauses. You know, we believe farmers should have more tools and not less. And we with this different vision of what agriculture is actually in Europe, we see that access to European farmers to many of the modern tools are not possible to date. And this is where we also hope convincing, bringing good data, that this might change.
Okay, thank you, Petra. I think that was a very nice synopsis there within the 4-minute slot of sort of providing your assessment of the good, bad, and ugly sort of elements within that. And we'll tease out some of that. You seem very passionate about the benchmarking system, and this has been a sort of a current throughout the day. So maybe we'll dig down in a moment once your colleagues have spoken. So Alberto, I turn to you now. So you take it away from your perspective.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, and I'd like to start with something that our colleague from the FAO started this morning. I tend to start always my speeches when I discuss about this issue with farmers or with farmers in the room, thanking the farmers for our breakfast this morning, for our dinner that we'll have later, for the lunch. We owe a lot to farmers. We eat well thanks to them. And I want to add this time also, thank to our environmental colleagues for keeping the environmental bar high. Because whatever happens, whatever we discuss about here, or whatever discussion is happening outside of this room, the climate, the biodiversity, the pollution challenges remain. So the bar needs to still be kept high. And that's, of course, is my role as working for the International Union for Conservation of Nature. But this said, this is actually something that goes for farmers, because there is no such thing as sustainable farming if we don't have an environment that supports that farming. Now to the million-dollar question, if you want, how could reconcile biodiversity and agricultural goals, which is reflected in the vision? Well, again, a general reflection, just to start. The origin of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture was exactly that, how to reconcile environment and agriculture. That was the challenge. It's still the challenge, but now there are other challenges on top of it. And I want to remind this also to the audience, and I'm sure that everybody's aware, but it's important because at the moment there are so many things over the table, geopolitical challenges, trade wars, everything that you can imagine. And on top of that, we still have the environmental challenges, and we can't lose sight of that. It's like if we are in a boat that is sinking, and there are many fires. Yes, but the boat is sinking anyway still. So just not to forget that we are still here because of the environmental challenges, or one of the reasons. Now, this said about the vision, there are many things there that are, of course, welcome, and I think that it's easy to find for all of us, for each of us, elements that we are going to like, because the vision is very comprehensive and varied, and it has a kind of, I wouldn't say menu, but definitely a lot of different aspects. So when it comes to the environment, you can find many issues related with circularity, with soil, with water resilience. It's definitely something that it is difficult to disagree with, as I was trying to say. Now, there are some elements that I want to highlight. In particular, when it comes to the toolbox, and that was mentioned also by my colleagues, yes, there are some additional, if you want, or a menu that is being showed there. And in one there that I want to highlight in particular, which is the nature-based solutions. It's mentioned there in one corner, in one sentence. But I think it's important to realize that that has an enormous potential for the future. And I think that we will be very far off if we start to also think in terms of how we can use nature to serve our own purposes, simply because it's going to serve many purposes. Very important, and actually probably the main thing, and with this probably I conclude this very short initial statements. I think that we all agree, and I would also that we all agree, that farmers are at the center of that vision, and this is something that will be very welcome. There is no transition, there is going to be no transition if we don't have farmers really making it happen. And I think that all here, all, including the environmental organizations, we are here to try to help or find ways to help farmers to ensure that the transition really happens, and it happens in a fair and in a transparent and in a good way for them finally. Another point, and with that really I conclude, that is also mentioned there, and as I said, you can find everything there. So at the very end is a good way to, if you want, always agree. There is a mention to the implementation of existing current legislation. And this is different from the famous simplification, because simplification, yes, is there, and it's also important, and we can all agree. It's very easy to agree, again, on simplification. Administrative burden is not something that none of us want. But this said, the fact that we have all this environmental legislation in place is for a reason. And actually, we should not aim to degrade that, rather to ensure that it's working in a better way. Yes, implementation has to be better. Simplification can be found in terms of different ways of maybe monitoring or maybe many other issues, but it's not about deregulation, as we were saying many times. I will say, deregulation maybe is needed if that serves the purpose still of the environment. But it is for sure important to conclude, if you want, that simplification is not the same as lowering the environmental bar. We are still having the challenges of environment, as I was saying at the beginning, and there is no such way as a step backwards, or we will just be bad for farming and for agriculture.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Very clear. Very quickly, do you fear that the Commission's simplification agenda equates to a regression in terms of the strength and the capacity of agri-environment measures? Do you think it's a step backwards, as we have seen perhaps with GAC, for example, and more technical, and we don't have to go into the detail here, but is that a fear that you have as a IUCN representative?
Yeah, well, I'm struggling with the word fear. And that's why I was thinking how best to answer, because it's not a fear. It's just if you want a warning, if you want from the side of the environment, I insist, it's not because of the environment is warning. No, it's about farmers also need environment. And if we go some steps backwards in the environmental side of the things, we are also going to harm farmers. So yes, there is a challenge. And by the way, there is also, in the IUCN, we have some resolutions that we agree in different World Conservation Congress. The next one is, by the way, upcoming in October this year. And one of them is about the non-regression principle, which we, all members of IUCN, including many member states and actually members that are also here in this room, we agree. There is no such way of a regression that will help the environment. It's a principle of sustainable development. So everything that we have achieved is just a step forward for environment. And if you want, with this I conclude, but let us remember that sometimes we have the impression, or we can have the impression, or some people could have the impression that the last years have been very much pro-environment. Well, one could argue that the last 50 years have not been that much pro-environment, and suddenly the last 5 years there was a moment to advance a little bit. Now we are back in the economic discussion, and I need to insist all the time, it's not about gaining somebody winning or losing, it's about ensuring that everything goes in a balance. So now we can't lose sight of the environment as one of the key priorities still for agriculture.
No, very clear message indeed. Noor, I turn to you now from the Nature Conservancy International. Your perspective, please, Noor, when you're ready.
Thanks, Rose. Well, for anyone who doesn't know us, and as an environmental organisation, TNC's mission is to protect the lands and water upon which all life depends. We're active in over 80 countries around the world to protect people, nature, and climate. And you know, as our wonderful astronaut speaker said this morning, you know, we really believe the mission is indeed bigger than any of us. And that's why we really need to find common ground, as Katie from the Australian Farm Institute said. We need to work together. And that's the reason why TNC has been a long-standing member of the Forum for Future of Agriculture. We're proud to work with all parts of the value chain, the members, the diverse members of the Forum for Future of Agriculture, because we believe we simply can't achieve that mission unless all of us are working together to find that common ground. Now, I mention that because when it comes to the vision, the FFA, we together, all of us, worked on a contribution to the vision. You can see our letter to the Commissioner on the website. And one of the things that I was really proud of about that letter was that as a very diverse group of civil society, businesses, farmers and landowners, one of the very strong messages we all came together on was the strong need to link food and water security to biodiversity and climate security. And I think that was, you know, really a very strong step forward. It built on the call to action that the FFA made in Madrid a couple of years ago, where as the FFA, we also came out publicly to support the nature restoration law at a time when actually that was a very polarized debate. So I think, you know, what we're doing working together demonstrates that you can have strong consensus across all the different stakeholders. And as Tassos said earlier, sadly, what we see in the vision doesn't actually make that link to sustainability anywhere strongly enough. So I'm pleased to see the FFA, you know, in our joint letter, we did make that message really clear. Good to hear the Commissioner mention it in the intro video. And of course, at this stage, the vision is simply a set of signals and signposts. It's not yet providing the detailed roadmap that we need in terms of how we get to the goals. So we obviously hope that will come next. But that's really the next step that we really need. We really need a detailed roadmap for regenerative, a detailed policy roadmap that will set out how we can recognise and reward producers for delivering better outcomes. Now, to our knowledge, Europe has never had a policy roadmap for regenerative forms of agriculture and food production. And that, I think, is a really big gap, and we need to fill that. And that's also because more regenerative forms of farming and food production do support Europe's strategic autonomy. They do support our climate resilience. I was lucky enough to be able to visit a farm here in Belgium last month, hosted by the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture. And it was a wonderful farmer who runs several hundred hectares of arable crops. And he was telling us that in the tragic 2021 floods here in Belgium that sadly claimed loss of life, it was really evident to him that whilst there was tons of soil and water running off neighbouring farms into nearby villages and communities, the investment that he had made on his farm in terms of providing more durable soil that retained its structure in the face of those floods, his was the only farm where the fields remained intact. Now, to me, he is a successful farmer, I know, but he's also an unsung climate hero. So as Jürgen Tack from the ELO said earlier, how are we going to recognize and reward those unsung heroes, those who are investing in practices that deliver better outcomes, not just for our food and water security, but also for our communities, for our security, and for our resilience? And I think that really is where we need to see the vision go next. We need to see the vision translated into a detailed roadmap that we can actually follow. That's clear and simple, yes, but is also actionable. And I think, in that respect, that leads me to say that, in summary, that we need to move faster. The vision is great, but every day that goes by that we wait, the costs of inaction will rise. They are rising. And they're also rising for the next generation of farmers. We do them no favors the longer that we wait. So we have to speed up on the vision. We also need to make sure, as we heard earlier, that the financing is in place. That means all forms of financing, public, but also private sector financing, including the role of nature credits, which, if there's time, I'd love to talk more about.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment, Noor, but I think you've covered a lot of ground there, and certainly, as you say, the vision is a roadmap as such, and we await, of course, the legislative proposals which will come after the multi-annual financial framework, whenever that may be, June or July of this year. So all wait with bated breath under the Danish presidency. But thank you, Noor, for that very nice, succinct sort of roundup, let's say, of some of the key elements from your perspective, from a TNC's perspective. So now, Bart, you're coming from Nestlé Europe, so a different perspective from the more food production side of things, and at the other end of the chain. When you're ready, take it away. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Kate, let me start. I was a kid. I lived on a farm when I was a kid. Then I studied agri-food engineering, and I ended up with Nestlé right now. So as you can imagine, I prefer more action than vision. Huh? And I think, to Noor's point, that is probably important to say. The farmer part in me would say, on this vision, where is the money to realize it? The Nestlé employee part would say, okay, we have a net zero commitment, we are committed to regenerative agriculture, but how does the vision really enable us to work with these 600,000 farmers in our supply chain, or in the regions, in the landscape around us, to scale that really up? And then the third part of me, the more scientific engineering part, says, where the hell is the consumer here? Where is the food? Huh? Because, and I think even on my badge, I put it away, we talked here on this session on the vision of agriculture, and I said, oh, where is food? And actually, it was maybe something we did intuitively, because indeed, food is missing a bit in this vision, and in the implementation, we need to bring it back, because I think consumers really care about what we are talking ultimately. They just don't know how to really contribute to it, how to be enabled in this, and that is a very important part. The method of the dialogue is good. We bring the people together, including consumers, industry, and so on. But the method is, for me, not enough. We need to tools. Petra, you mentioned already the compass or the benchmarking tool, because we will need it really. We talked about it. What is for me important and why we fully support it is really that it can align funding from the public and private part. And finally, we have a cockpit. We say, okay, that's the direction. However, it needs to be stupid and simple somehow. Not stupid, but stupid simple. Because otherwise we will completely fail. And also it needs to be built on expertise that is there. We work with many food companies in the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative that have been working for decades already with farmers, implementing standards. We know exactly how to do it, how to measure progress, how to measure outcomes as well. Sustainable Agriculture Initiative is really one that I would like to bring forward, to bring this expertise to build that tool. And by the way, final point, we should not only reward on the outcomes. Tassos also mentioned there is a time perspective, but there is also an onboarding perspective. Because if we don't bring them on board, how will we ever think that there will be outcomes that we were talking about, Noor? So I think that's important.
Thank you, Bart. And as you say, that involves the buy-in, right? And as Tassa said earlier, it's more of a longer-term investment when it comes to soil health. It's more of over a longer period of time rather than an annual programme. You mentioned, of course, that Nestlé would be part of the umbrella body that is Food Drink Europe. Were you surprised, I would imagine you were, that the manufacturing sector for food and drink was left out of the Draghi report on competitiveness? This is something that's raised again and again in the vision, right? Even Commissioner Hansen mentioned it himself in the video clip. What was your reaction when you read the Draghi report and saw this major lacuna, let's say, in terms of the reference to your own sector?
It looks like, because the food industry is here to stay, that we don't need to be competitive somehow, or that we don't deserve the attention. So I think from that end, it's positive to see that there is now a commissioner for agriculture and food. However, the vision needs to be really also thinking about food, and then with Food Drink Europe, we also say we were a bit disappointed, but I think we take it positive because we have a food investment and resilience plan that we agreed in the organization, which is clearly all about enabling us all together to make this transition, because there is a clear need. I will not repeat that. Everybody has said that here. And I think for that reason, we need to be there, and we need the full support, not only from Agri, but from many other DGs to make it happen and to make it reflected in the policy.
Yeah, as you say, a cross-cutting approach. Petra, may I turn to you? This call to action that was launched, 2 years ago, you say, in Madrid. What's the next steps in terms of that call to action? It's, there's a letter to Hansen. There was a very sort of joined-up approach when it came to the vision that was presented to Hansen. What can we expect in the future when it comes to this initiative?
I think what we are looking for now to see is the Commission come forward with concrete proposals. I think, Nora, that's what you meant in terms of roadmap, and we stand ready to contribute. We need to shape this in dialogue. When we look at, for example, the biocontrols pathways, we have very concrete ideas how this could be accelerated, how the bodies could become faster, more targeted, to look at the data that are required and how can we speed up the process. This is one idea.
Okay, and that's certainly positive from your industry point of view. If I turn to Alberto then, examples or specific initiatives that manage to deliver this sort of holistic approach to sustainability from an economic, social, environmental side. Do you have any examples that you can share with us at the forum?
Yes, well, they will remain a bit general. In some minutes, it's impossible to get to very specific examples, but there is something that is interesting when you come to sustainable agriculture. First of all, is probably if you ask what is sustainable agriculture to each person in this room, maybe the answers will not be exactly the same for everybody. So it's already a challenge. But there are many words or terminology out there that can help and sometimes confuse, actually, like regenerative agriculture, we have heard many times, agroecology, conservation agriculture, ecological intensification, you name it. Well, at the very end, we are all referring more or less to the same, and actually, if you try to squeeze what is out there, you will find a number of practices that we all agree that they are sustainable agriculture. And I'm referring to a particular publication that we had some years ago. It was called Approaches to Sustainable Agriculture from the IUCN, and we tried to collect all this terminology, try to get all the information around this, simple literature review, and try to discuss also about it with environmental organizations, with landowners, with farmer organizations, with the academia, and trying to get to a kind of, I wouldn't say consensus, I can't claim that, but definitely collect all the input and understand, well, this is sustainable agriculture. And if we all agree that these are the ways, and actually this is a richness, there are many different ways of doing sustainable agriculture depending on the situation. Well, if we all agree that that's the way to do sustainable agriculture, in a way one could wonder, well, if there is public support to agriculture, maybe it will be public support to this kind of agriculture. Different types, I insist, but that's maybe a way forward. So this is, if you want, a first answer to your question about examples. And now I'm going to jump even higher. I know that this is not exactly going to examples, but let's remember that this is not a European issue. This is a global issue. We have a challenge in agriculture and in environment all over the world. And there is, at the moment, many movements and many discussions in the environmental discussion. Sustainable agriculture is a discussion that is now probably I think that there is nobody in the environmental discussion that is not discussing about it at the moment. And this is creating some, I would say, interesting advances, and we should keep an eye on that. We were referring to the call to action before, and there is also a mention there to food security. Food security is an issue in the world, a very important one. We have been this morning listening some figures, I think 800 million persons, which is really impressive. In Europe, well, probably it's difficult to say that there is an issue of food security in Europe, actually something that comes in the call to action. There are risks, there are many risks associated to food security, geopolitical, trade, etc., but there is not really a risk. So anyway, just to conclude, because there is also something that I wanted to mention about the World Conservation Congress that is happening later on this year. This is every 4 years, it's the biggest environmental conservation gathering in the world. It's going to be in Abu Dhabi this time. And environmental and agriculture discussions will be joined and will be very prominent there. So this is an invitation for everybody to join.
Thank you. Another date for the diary there. Alberto. Noor, you mentioned that you wanted to delve into the concept of nature credits. So I'm just going to give you briefly the floor, because this is a concept that's thrown around. It's in the vision. I know that Commissioner Jessica Roswal is also floating it as an innovative source of financing for farmers. Can you give us sort of like a little snapshot of where this would, is it already in place, and how would it work on the ground practically?
Thanks, Rose. Well, it's early days. It's in the mission letter of the Commissioner, as you indicate. I just want to say, like, maybe one thing first, which is we cannot and should not compare carbon and biodiversity when it comes to thinking about credits. And I say this just because I think a little bit earlier I heard them used interchangeably. And it's really important to understand that it's apples and pears. Our scientists demonstrate that you can't really treat carbon and biodiversity the same when you think about carbon credits or nature credits. TNC was a founding member of the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits. That is a really, really good report. If you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It represents a very big step forward in the thinking around this. I think for us here in Europe, what we need to make sure we do to build towards effective nature markets is we first need to put in place a clear enabling policy framework across the EU 27. That should put all of the right science and policy governance in one place and serve as a foundation stone to then equip and allow member states to then start operationalizing nature credit schemes, but to common credible science and to common and clear policy guidance when it comes to governance. And why that's important? Well, for starters, we definitely don't want to see 27 different definitions of things like biodiversity net gain. I don't think that would be either economically sound or ecologically credible. We also need to make sure we make it as clear and as simple as possible for the market to invest, but at the same time give member states the flexibility to be able to put in place schemes in a way that works for their own economies and their own landowners, farmers. So that's really, I think, the next step. We need that foundational policy. We need an EU-wide framework that sets really clear goalposts for nature credits. And then I think we can start to see lots of innovative ways to start recognizing and rewarding good practices.
Very good. And as you say, a tailor-made approach, depending on regions, countries, etc. Thank you very much, Noor, for that. I'm going to open it up to the floor now, ladies and gentlemen. Do I have any questions? Yes. If I could get a mic right over here to this gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Jeroen Remmers from the TAPP Coalition. I have a question to Bart. You talked about the need for EU food policies next to agriculture policies. Last year, there were 2 reports published, one by the World Bank, one by the FAO, and both recommended to the countries like Europe, high-income countries, to have fiscal incentives, like reducing taxes on food products which are good for the environment and public health, but increasing taxes on foods that have negative impacts, for instance, meat and dairy. And there was a report from Oxford University that calculated how this would work in Europe, and it was really positive in the way that it would reduce food prices at consumer level, it would generate revenue for governments, but and it has positive impacts on public health and climate. But I want to know your opinion on it and also on agri-food ETS systems as a food policy tool.
So, food prices, this is really an interesting one. I can get really fired on that, so try to contain me, Rose. I think Merit McGuinness mentioned it already. It's really the conundrum that we are trying to tackle here, and the consumer need to be fully involved. Nevertheless, I think if we bring it back, how we will really be able to make this transition is not, because we can think about tax, but we can also think about incentivization. And I believe that what is underexplored for us is that we really work, also for Nestlé, by the way, we reach now 21% regenerative agriculture raw materials, but we work in a supply chain, so we work like this, and we look who is there, we need to, who will supply us this year, but we need to think much more holistic, because ultimately we don't have enough incentive from our side, from public side, to do it. So you need to pool all these incentives together, and this is probably the thing that we need to do. We need to work more in landscapes, because landscapes, it's a bit of the mission from the astronaut as well this morning. What is our mission here in this room? What I feel the mission is that every landscape that we have in Europe, we need to transform it in a regenerative food system, ultimately, and bring all the actors there together, whoever they are, if they are animal farmers or plant-based farmers, or, but also the non-traditional farmers, food industry, yes, public and private, but also like drinking water companies, bankers, insurers, and we need to look what can everybody contribute in this landscape? And everybody can, honestly, but it needs to be done a bit different, and there needs to be clearly a role for everybody to help to change that, because we are not speaking about status quo, Jérôme, we are not, and it's not necessarily by tax, it's also by pooling the resources, not only financial, but also human, bring that together, and that needs to be facilitated. And that's my strong belief, that's my strong mission, I would say. If there is one thing today, let's be together there at local level, at micro level, not in the space, on the ground, look at this, bring it together, and get this supported from Brussels as well, because we overlook this.
A food systems approach, Bart. That's a good point. I'm going to turn now to an online question, if I may. It's come in online, and it's quite a segue, a perfect segue from your response there. It comes in from Annemiek Kangels, who is from the Dutch provinces. Question is, can you explain that upon crises such as COVID and defense, the whole world can respond very quickly, accurately, and targeted, no matter the costs or the sacrifices by the public, but not on the environmental crisis? So, briefly, Petra, what do you say to that? You've had time to mull over that question a little bit. You're nearest to the screen. So during COVID, we all, it was the mission. The mission was to get out on the other side of the pandemic. We kind of banded together. No matter the cost, the sacrifices, we rose to that challenge. What is that limiting factor when it comes to dealing with the environmental crisis? Why are we all in silos, fighting a good fight, but without that coordinated approach?
So to me, the only answer is the time lag and the timeline. So we haven't understood yet that this is not about saving the planet. This is about saving us. But it's still not real. It's still time-wise out. And we have seen the political reaction to pricing in the cost of externalities, right? Everybody was voted down. It's the economy that counts, but not climate targets, as sad as it is. This is why I'm confident somehow on the technological progress. So we need to make this as easy as possible, not saying we will totally succeed, but we have studies who say probably 50% of the support farmers need to reduce emissions in line with Paris goals would come from new technologies. So this might be a way to make it work.
That's a time lag, as you say. In response to Annemiek's question, Alberto, briefly?
Well, to that answer, to that question, that answer will be very quick for me. Not really, it's strange, but it has to do probably with many considerations that are also economic, but maybe something that could help also, because finally we are here to having a dialogue. It's a little bit of the EVAF, the famous EVAF, as you know, the board that is happening now, and there are many members of the EVAF here, and there are also lots of them that are not members of the EVAF, actually, in this panel. So the discussions that are happening at the moment, they are very, very useful to ensure that we advance, and it's relatively easy to discuss about these kind of things here in the Brussels arena, let's say, when we are all sitting down in a comfortable place and we're all understanding each other and having a civilized conversation, let's say. It becomes more complicated when it goes to the local level, and it's something I mentioned yesterday, but I think it's important. When we all come back to our own constituencies later on, I think it is very important that we keep this kind of level of discussing that can help, can percolate finally in the minds of everybody, because at the very end, we have things to learn, all of us, from the environmental side, about how the market works probably, and about how many things are needed to be considered, and from the agricultural side, about how many environmental discussions still need to be advanced. And we all know all these things, but it's much more difficult when it comes to the how. So my point is, let's try to be as constructive as possible. We discuss also with our own constituencies and trying to bring the messages that are coming from here to those discussions. That can be very helpful.
Okay, thank you for that, Alberto. Noor.
Thanks. Well, I think Annemiek asked the best question of the day, in my view. And Petra just recognised very much what you said. It's not about saving the planet, it's about saving us. That's actually the title of a very famous book by TNC's chief scientist, Katharine Hayhoe, who makes that point very eloquently. Again, recommend that book if you haven't read it. I would just say the truth is that climate and nature, a healthy climate and nature, really is our first line of security and defence. Right, we've got to recognise that actually happy, healthy, well-fed, well-watered communities are often peaceful, stable communities. Right, the things go hand in hand. It's not either or. So we've got to, even in times where we know that conflict and security is very high up on the agenda, we can't see it as either or. It's and. And if we don't, we ignore that to our peril.
Thank you very much, Noor. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this panel discussion. Thank you to Annemiek and to all of you in the room for contributing. Apologies, we're sort of in the final straight of our forum. So I'll wrap up this dialogue session now. So Petra, Alberto, Noor and Bart. It's the end of the day, Alberto, forgive me. Thank you very much indeed. And you may now return to your seats.